I want you to get together.
This Saturnalia. Imagine a world where the truth was accessible and relatable. Where red baubles on a Nimrod phallus are forever changed. A solstice celebration where conspiracy and intrigue carry you away. Experience The Nephilim Looked Like Clowns, the perfect book for your weird way of life. Direct from Europe, this highly rated research has warmed the hearts of millions in time for the frosty season. Be inspired by timeless biblical questions such as, what the hell is Satan's problem? Ham did what to Noah? Was the pre-flood world really that bad? And if classic questions aren't your thing, and you prefer your Yuletide to be extra occult, take a trip to the unknown with the spine-chilling Hatman to the psychedelic realm of demonic jesters. You'll get 20 obscure and tantalizing chapters. No other book gives you the feeling of pure vindication towards your childhood fear of clowns. Each paragraph brings the wonder of Christ's sacrifice into your home. For this commercialized nonsense holiday, there's no greater gift for your family than a guide to effective spiritual warfare. Order now and get that edgelord of a teenage child of yours to Christ this winter. Sometimes in this little season, it takes clowns to get them there. To get your copy, do not call the number on screen, which is being used as a placeholder reminder of a bygone time. And don't send a check to any PO box because this is not the 90s anymore. Simply type in The Nephilim Look Like Clowns on Amazon to get your copy just in time to lock yourself away from the world and wait out the pagan festivities.
So, hey everyone, this is JCK, and you haven't seen me around for quite a while, but I am continuing on and creating more content for you. And one of the things I am deep into is, as a Christian, a new Christian, I'm exploring a lot of topics that still feed this thirst for knowledge about things that don't seem quite right, the different conspiracies and things of that nature. And one of the wonderful channels that I've come across since becoming a Christian in 2023 is none other than Paul Stobbs' channel, Understanding Conspiracy. And I have him here today. How are you going, Paul? It's so good to see you.
Thanks, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
And Paul, you know, we've got a lot of my audience are they've of varying beliefs. So a lot of them have come across your channel and they do love your work, but quite a bit of them are still are in the Gnostic sort of framework of things. Some are new Christians, but just tell me a bit about yourself and your story, your bio, and so that we can get an idea of your journey to creating your channel. And I know that you restarted your channel again, and just tell us a bit about that.
Yes, so I've been on YouTube for about 10 years. I started the channel in 2014. And it was basically at the end of a 3-year stint of university studying fine arts. And my channel was basically the result of that project. I started my university experience kind of a psychedelic tripping, weed smoking, Taoist Eastern philosophy thinking type guy, looking for worldly answers, quite a worldly hedonistic partying type typical art student. That's pretty much a stereotype through and through, and I cringe looking back at some of the things I used to get up to and say, and Facebook likes to remind you the things you used to post a decade ago, and I'm like, who the hell is that guy, so but back in the day, I kind of went to university, and I've always kind of been a creative guy, always been an artist, and it was the natural progression of my life to end up studying these things. And very early on, it was 2011 when I went to Lincoln University, studying next to this gorgeous cathedral on a daily basis at a place called Greystone. And there were these pilgrim steps right next to me, which went straight up to the northeast, the southern wall of the cathedral is where it would have ended up. And and at the time when I first went there, I didn't care about much about that because I wasn't a religious person. I had no religious bone in my body. I wasn't raised any form of religion, Christian or otherwise. A religious would be the best way to describe my family, just not really a thought. We just don't think about it. We're not strongly against it necessarily. It's just we just don't talk about it. We're not bothered. It was never a thing for us. My grandma was a Catholic. I had some pretty shallow experiences with the Catholic Church at a young age with her. She took me to a couple of things, and I unfortunately had the experience of witnessing an old lady pass out in front of me while the bishop, I suppose I'm not sure what you would call them, was doing the sermon, and she hit her head on the wooden pew, and I assume she died. She was very frail. If she survived that, then good on her, but it looked pretty dire from the situation. So that was kind of my only experience with anything to do with Christianity in any way, shape, or form, and I think that tainted me for many years. And I think I grew up maybe atheistic, a-religious, and went down the Eastern psychedelic path from like the age of 16 onwards. I always had these questions. I'm a creative guy. Like I said, I'm an artist. I'm a painter and a drawer. And I'd always followed that through in everything I do, looking for answers of what's the meaning of life, why we're here, the usual things you try and battle with in your late teen years, your early 20s. And when I got to university and was in this highly spiritual setting, I kind of really started to dive deep into the psychedelic exploration stuff, and I really wanted to understand what is this world we live in, what's really going on. And I began kind of getting swept up in like the zeitgeist stuff at the time, that was quite popular back in the day. Jesus is just nothing but a sun god type symbolism stuff. And I was pretty much all there, all about the electromagnetic universe principles, symbols of an alien sky, about the planetary alignments causing a plasma apocalypse in the past. And everything's just symbolic of things, and while swimming in that realm, I fell into conspiracy, which is quite a logical step when you're already in that kind of world, thinking about those type of concepts. You end up getting sucked into seeing that there's these evil controllers that pretty much worship Satan, who are in control of everything, and they're doing terrible things to the most innocent of people. What do we do? And they have this new world order agenda, and I was just kind of deep diving and falling deeper down the rabbit hole in 2011 at the start of my degree. And I was heavily into sacred geometry, drawing all sorts of things to relate it to the flower of life. And as an artist, that became my subject matter, sacred geometry, for the first year. And it slowly developed into strictly conspiracy was just my only subject matter from then on. And I became obsessed with understanding the conspiracy. What is it? What is it? There's so many factions in this subgroup genre of conspiracy online. It wasn't just a monolith. It was an umbrella of varying beliefs, all arguing with each other about the true nature of reality and how the control works and where the truth lies. And I started the channel sincerely wanting to try and figure that out for myself. So I kind of did like a meta review of conspiracy culture. And I was looking at the whole thing, all the factions, the New Ages up here, the Gnostics down here, the left wing, the right wing, the conservatives, the Christians, and you got the 99% anonymous types at the time wearing the Guy Fawkes masks. It was a big umbrella group of people who didn't have a consensus on the spiritual matters. They all agreed we were under control, but there was no spiritual cohesion between the group in any way about the bigger picture nature of reality. So like I said, while that was going on, I was doing the psychedelic stuff. And, I eventually came to the end of my degree and I was completely lost. I had no idea what was going on. But I'd seen some things and had enough experiences with the psychedelic stuff to know what I see and perceive in my daily life isn't all that there is. There's a spiritual realm. I know it's there because I've tangibly experienced it. I can't deny that. It seems like this is a creation. It has a creator. And you first kind of speculate on, holographic theory, and you go down the quantum theory of ideas of projection of the nature of reality. You go down the Eastern Taoist philosophies of, everyone is just consciousness and we're all kind of one consciousness. And they have this principle, don't they, in Buddhism or in the Tao or in Hinduism, that the Brahman or the force of consciousness is all one. But what it's done is kind of dissipated itself down into separate vessels and forgotten that it's one to pretend to not be God for a little bit. And maybe that's what we're all doing. We're all God who's just purposely forgotten that we're God. And when we die, you pop a balloon, the air goes back into the rest of the air. That's kind of all we are, And I kind of settled on that for a long time. And I've realized that is the most vapid, awful, nihilistic view to actually have when you really start to get into the Christian perspective. And I didn't want to go down the Christian angle because I've been swimming in this conspiracy world and I've been going down every other route but the Christian perspective to explain the conspiracy. I didn't want to go there. I assumed they have no answers. What can they possibly tell me? Those backwards, weirdo, desert religion believing crazy people, like it doesn't make any sense, Why would I go down that route? But I kept bumping into people online who, pastors. Derek Prince was actually a huge influence on me in the early days. He's not around anymore, and I don't think he was even around when I was listening to him. But he was going on about spiritual warfare specifically, and that for me explained a lot about my own experiences through life, where I had encounters with demonic forces, But at the time, I wouldn't have called them that. I would have called them Jungian archetypes of my shadow and my attempts to integrate them back into myself, whatever other vain philosophy you want to come up with to explain away these tangible separate entities. I didn't consider them to be demonic or something separate from me, until I started listening to the Christian understanding. And then I started to listen to like people like Rob Skiba in the early days as well. And there was actually like a good handful of people at the time online. Rob was probably one of the most prolific, but there was people like Gary Wayne just published his book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And it was kind of, you're reading all this stuff about ancient biblical history, and it contextualizes this time where the giants ruled and their disembodied forms became demons, the spirits trapped on earth. And it really explained a lot for me. And for some reason, it just rang true. But again, I didn't want it to be true. I didn't want the Christians to have the answers. I really didn't. There was no benefit for me to go down that route. I didn't understand it. Even I couldn't understand how some Jew being nailed to a piece of wood could help save me, or what I even need saving from. What has that got to do with anything? It sounds like nonsense. And it does on the surface to most people with no context to understand what any of that meant. It does sound like nonsense. But then it's kind of like I had this moment at the end of my degree. I was utterly burnt out from heavy drug use, loneliness, depression, anxiety, existential anxiety, the fear of the conspiracy, the black pill, red pill thing that comes with that, of understanding how miserable and horrible life truly is, how the control we are. You feel like the whole weight of the world's on your shoulders. You're losing your friends and family all around you because they think you're crazy now because you're talking about secret societies and all these type of things. It all kind of amalgamates into this moment of a low point in my life where I was just on my knees, basically desperate. I was like, I can't find the answer myself. Hermetical alchemical principles have not saved me or helped me or bettered my life in any way, shape, or form, as much as they like to say that knowledge will give you this freedom. It didn't give me anything. And I understood it. I'm not some ignorant fool who doesn't understand the principles. It's like, oh, you're just not smart enough to get it, or any of that nonsense. It's kind of, I lived it for years and I got nowhere. It only made my life worse, in fact, under this illusion that, well, I'm getting smarter, so my life is better. But tangibly speaking, my life was not getting better. It was getting obviously worse. I was neglecting important things such as family, relationship, personal hygiene, wealth, progression, building up, having a personality, for example, actually building up treasures on earth that can be valuable into growth, not the pursuit of happiness, but the pursuit of responsibility, shirking all of those things, thinking, well, I'm God anyway, what does it matter? And it's kind of, you kind of, at this low point, I did just simply say, okay, God, if you're real, show me, help me. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do it. I can't figure it out. It's too much. What's going on? And from that day, March 2014, everything changed. And I mean that. I'm not just saying that like in some airy fairy, like things quite literally changed And I was at the time at a stag do, which I suppose in Australia, do you call it a stag do? Is it the same? In America, it's a bachelor's party. I think they call it something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was at this for my now brother-in-law, who was marrying my sister, and we were in a separate city. We're all there, and I had a night of drinking and partying and the rest. And I got back to the hotel room, and I was like, I'm done. And that's when I had that moment, where I got down and said, "What am I doing?" And I asked God for help. Nothing really happened. I got up, I ran a bath, and I got in the bath. And for context, I hadn't had a bath in like 15 years. I'd only ever lived in a place that had a shower cubicle. So an actual bath was just, I thought I'm taking my opportunity while I'm in this hotel, this fancy hotel. So I took the bath, and I only in hindsight can you realize I inadvertently baptized myself. And I didn't know this was a biblical principle at the time either, really, because I was new to the whole concept, but I suddenly shot up out of the bath with this rush of energy going through me. It kind of felt like a panic attack, but it was warm. It was more of a hug, a panic hug. And it's hard to explain. It was power. It's the only way to explain it. And I'm there panting in the mirror like, what the hell was that? I have no idea what that was. Whatever, let's just go to bed and leave it. But from that day, the things I used to derive pleasure from, like smoking weed on a daily basis, 5 joints a day, for 8 years straight by this point, nonstop. Being sober was a trip for me. It was the complete opposite. I've been smoking cigarettes for like 10 years straight, again, 20 a day, by this point, since the age of 15. I'm now, 24, 25 at this point. I'm 32 now. So if you do the math, I'm losing it, But it's kind of, I didn't want to do any of that anymore. Like, finally, for the first time in my life, I felt a conscience, guilt, a conviction when I did do those things that I had never experienced before. It's like this small, still voice in the back of my head. Every time I took like a toke of the joint or something, it's like, what are you doing? Every time. And the slow process began from that time of dropping all of these vices I used to rely upon as crutches to help keep me going through this, keep sane through the misery and drudgery of this insane world I've discovered I lived in. You know what I mean? Self-medicating, clearly. And, I was no longer in control of the use of that drug. It was controlling me. The tides had turned, but no longer was I deluding myself into thinking I was kind of, I've got it under control. I can quit whenever I want, all this type of stuff, And I'm not here to argue with your audience like the validity of cannabis and how it's better than alcohol, but I know all the arguments. I've heard them all. I know what works for some doesn't work for others. It's just a tool. It's not a thing that it's not bad in and of itself. It's the people who abuse it. I was abusing it. Okay. So it got to the point where I was kind of dropping all these addictions, and I had this brand new channel fresh out of university. And I went hard into making videos, just trying to lay it all out while also going through this personal change. And I wouldn't say when the channel began, I had the intention of being a Christian channel, because by this point, I didn't realize I kind of converted to Christianity. It was early days, and I was still playing with these old philosophies, but they kept crumbling the more I went into the biblical perspective. And the more context for history I actually got from the biblical stories outside of canon, like from the Book of Enoch or Jasher or Jubilees and all these other ones, and the Apocrypha, and then they get the main story from the New Testament, but then you also go into the Old Testament of Genesis 6, and you start to get this holistic image created, and it really contextualizes why we have a conspiracy, more so than any other belief system or religion or philosophy can give you in this idea. And I basically, my faith got stronger. God was proving to me that he was there with me. This conviction of the Holy Spirit was upon me. I had changed. I'd been born again and didn't realize I wasn't the same person I was before me asking God to help me and having that moment. And it was proving to me more and more as evidential that God is real. And if you ask, you will receive. The promises were true, So I got to know Jesus. I got to have a personal relationship with God, and I got to grips with the biblical understanding. And again, all these false religions from these false gods, which do have a historical reason for being there, which you start to learn, they were defeated a long time ago, and they can't save you today. And that's basically my testimony to coming to Christ. And the channel has been going from strength to strength since that time. And I had
a beautiful story. I mean, just hearing it, the passion in your voice, and you've really summed up basically the story of many people and the journey of many people through this, trying to comprehend who we are and where we are and when we are. And you're still on that journey, aren't you, in your with your channel, trying to explore that and piece that out. Have people in your life, when you became Christian, so that you're saying that was roughly 10 years ago, did they notice that massive change in you? Or was it something that happened very gradually? Was it because for me, when I got saved, it was the exact same thing, very gentle thing, but it was a powerful energy. And, but overnight just turned off all the old things.
It wasn't sudden. It took time
Yeah,
to
it
you
does
know,
crumble away. Yeah,
it's like burning away the old self for the new self
yeah,
to kind of take over. It The conviction was instant, but
yes,
my willingness to conform with God's
yeah,
will was still a struggle. I was still human. I'm rebellious. I'm sinful by nature, and I didn't want to let go of my vices. But I did it. But I had this constant pressure on me. It's like, stop. This is not what the plan I have for you. You need to drop this. If you want the answers, you got to put in the work. And it's kind of like, get sober, basically. And once you're sober, I can work with you. It's basically what God was telling me without directly telling me. It was this conviction. And again, it was unique. I'd never felt something like that before. I'd always had this feeling. It's kind of like, do what thy will should be the whole of the law type of attitude. What harm is it for me to do whatever I want to do? I'm not hurting anybody else, but what's wrong? If it feels good, how can it be bad type of stuff? Very, very childish worldviews when you think about it. But when you're in it and blind, spiritually blind, you don't understand why that's a problem. You don't have any reason to stop. You've been given over to a reprobate mind, as God explains it, and he's going to let you do that, and thank God for that method, because it's kind of like that classic jokes, like the father catches his child smoking a cigarette. So the father says, "Oh, you want to smoke, do you? Fine, have a whole carton of cigarettes," and give them 200. He says, "Smoke them all right in front of me right now." And until the kid just throws up from the nicotine overload, it's kind of like that's God's method. It's like, oh, you want to do all these horrible, sinful, dangerous things that are destroying your body, soul, and mind? Go for it. See where it gets you. You'll be rolling around in the mud with the pigs in no time, and you'll come running back. And that's basically what happened. It's the prodigal child.
The free will thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something that I've experienced, and I know you've experienced this as well, that as a Christian conspiracy theorist, it kind of fleshes things out a lot more than a lot of the other approaches to conspiracy theory. I used to call myself a Gnostic, a neo-Gnostic. Actually, I used to call myself a neo-Gnostic while I was doing all of this stuff. Not that long ago, I actually made a video called "I'm a neo-Gnostic girl in a neo-Gnostic world," and a lot of my friends who are still in that think that I'm now, because I'm Christian, I automatically reject anything to do with conspiracy. I'm going to be a square. And the flip side of that is it's actually your channel in particular, and the work that you've done has actually fleshed things out a lot more for me. These are the things that I want to explore with you today. Your first book, because I know there's going to be a lot more, The Nephilim Look Like Clowns. I'm putting it on order, but I haven't got it yet. But I'm very familiar with your work, and even when I wasn't a Christian, I was familiar with your work. So, can you explain to us, after writing this book and also dabbling with this concept? First of all, can you explain to us, how did you come to this conclusion about the Nephilim looking like clowns, and also maybe if you can give us a backstory of the timeline of all of this for those who aren't aware of what the Nephilim are. Maybe we start with that.
Sure. So in 2016, so a couple of years into having the channel, I was already swimming in biblical history by that point. I just needed to know everything there was about what was going on in the ancient past, to find answers and context for why we have conspirators today and secret societies to begin with. And you start learning about Genesis 6 and the sons of God mating with the daughters of men and creating giants. And that's kind of a throwaway line in the main canon of Genesis. And then it moves on. And it goes on to talk about the fall of man and Adam and Eve. And then he goes on to explain about Noah. And it's kind of like it goes into the lineages, and it starts going all the way down through to Abraham. It's all about lineages, the main Bible, the main canon. But you can find more context for that throwaway line by going to extra biblical books like First Enoch. And that seems to be canon, which has been removed for some nefarious reason. And there is Second Enoch and Third Enoch, which has a lot of a more of a Gnostic spin thrown in. They're the kind of later iterations of the original. But First Enoch is still a part of the Ethiopian Bible. It's well established canon, and it does talk about what Genesis 6 was trying to explain there. And modern churchianity, who don't believe or want to talk about the demonic aspects of the world and the angelic rebellion, they believe these aren't the real giants. They're just people who are great in metaphorical stature and power. It's when, the good children of God had sex with bad people, the sons of Cain, and it created, corrupt leaders and kings. So you can call them giants because of their wealth and power or something. And it's kind of, that doesn't stand in reality, because we have plenty of context outside of biblical texts that basically say every single culture around the earth believes in dragons and giants, literal giants that ate people. Like, we're not talking about some metaphorical powerful human or something like that. Every single culture has a mythos of giants ruling over mankind in some ancient past, and they are the offspring of dragons. And the Bible is no different. The Book of Enoch explains it clearly. The seraphim angels, the watchers, the fiery flying serpents, which is what Hebrew of seraph means, a fiery serpent, or the bite of a serpent's venom. They were the closest to God. They sang holy, holy, holy around his throne. If you look into any other text there, you got the visions of Ezekiel talking about the angels, and the seraphim are right there with their 6 wings in their fiery form. And I think God trusted them the most to be the watchers over humanity, and he positioned them as small g gods over factions of continents and cultures. And their job was to minister to us, to keep us on the right track, to look after us. But they kind of got used to the glory. They wanted to be as God themselves. And at the same time, Lucifer had his own rebellion going on, and he didn't want to bow down to man. And, it's kind of, are you joking? Like, we are far superior to these things. We are gods on earth. I am not going to serve them. They're going to serve me. And I think some angels agreed with him. And 200 of these Watcher class angels clearly made a pact to corrupt God's creation, especially man, and insert their own progeny and seed onto earth, to make them the legitimate heirs to be rulers and kings over the earth, because God created man in his image to do that job. And Adam was the one he was grooming to do that. So the serpents deceived Adam and Eve and convinced them that God just wants to keep you down, man. He just wants to make you stupid and lesser than him. If you eat that fruit, he knows you'll be like him, and then he's got competition. He doesn't want that, He wants to keep you down. He's a cruel, evil prison keeper, keeping you trapped in this garden. You know what I mean? There's so much more out there. You could be gods. Just bite the apple. Do that thing God told you not to do. Rebel, and they did, and they suffered the consequences. They fell into duality. They fell into the black and white of good and evil, of knowledge, and they saw they were naked for the first time, and they had fallen from the closest to God you could possibly be, walking in a garden with him. They fell out from that, and now they're wandering in the earth with the rest of us. And that was the first attempt to corrupt the creation. And I think after that, as the Watchers watched man spread over earth, they saw Cain kill his brother, and he went off, and he had some knowledge learned from his father, who walked with God. And with that knowledge, the 7 sacred sciences as they're understood, geometry, math, astronomy, all the usual stuff, all the things most colleges are still dedicated to today, science, he went out among the peoples. And if you look into it, this gets trippy. Gary Wayne does a lot of work on this. Adam and Eve were not the first people. There was more people all over the earth before that. Adam was just set apart, and he failed. So while back with all these other people, Cain takes a wife from them, and he has a child, and he calls it Enoch, and he builds a city. Cities need people to be building them and to fill them. So there was already people around, and he took a wife from these other people. And I'm not saying they were lesser than Adam and Eve. They were just people. It's just Adam was just kind of plucked out of them and put in a garden somewhere, but they're all the same species. But Cain went on and used this knowledge and dominated, basically, because, compared to these other people who didn't walk with God, he seemed like a god to them with all this knowledge of math and weights and measures. And it's explained in like Jewish texts, like Josephus talks about these early times. He's saying things like, it was simple things like weights and measures. Like the agrarian people of the time when Cain rocked up, they didn't know anything about property lines and borders and things like that. That didn't make any sense.
Right.
But he kind of introduced this idea of, no, that's yours and that's
Yes.
theirs, and it's kind of these simple boundary concepts created corruption in man, greed,
Mm.
territory. And he built, using the knowledge, cities, which is quite domineering over the earth. It's not in a key with the earth like its Seth lineage was more living in tune and one with nature. Cain was about dominating nature and establishing his cenotaphs and things like this. So he's basically the first Mason, if you want to call it anything, and it's definitely an inspiration for later iterations. But he basically had rebellion in his heart. He was cursed by God, and he didn't really have the mark to separate him from other people. And in a way, he was invincible as well, because that mark said, if anybody kills you, the punishment will be 7 times worse than what you're suffering. So he was an invincible man with godlike knowledge, and he used it to his advantage. And I think the angels, the watchers who were in corruption and rebellion, saw this, and they basically said, I think we might have a friend here. The enemy of our enemy is our friend principle. He's also in rebellion against God. So on Mount Hermon, 200 watch class angels led by Azazel and Samyaza, some argue might be the same angel, but let's just say for the sake of the names were given, there's these 2 angels, these 2 leaders. They made a deal with 200 angels and says, let's agree to do this thing, which we know we're going to suffer harsh consequences for. And they took the wives from the daughters of Cain. It's possible Cain offered up his daughters to join in with the rebellion and keep going with this, rolling with this idea. And in the 6th generation from Seth, in the times of Jared, so it'd been a while by this point, giants were introduced into the gene pool. The offspring of this unholy union, which is not ordained by God, was giants, and they did not look human. And this is where my work gets into it. This is where we're talking about the Nephilim looking like clowns. So have a quick drink here because I get a bit raspy.
No worries. You've been talking for quite a bit, and I love the way that you're laying this out for everybody. For those who are not aware of this history, I think a lot of people in conspiracy circles tend to believe that the Earth was seeded by aliens, and they may not have this concept of God the way we do, and they think that the Bible is just all analogy or metaphor. But you very clearly, in your work and in Gary Wayne's work, prove that the Nephilim are not a metaphor, that they're actually real, and this is historical evidence for it, and we can see it in the bloodlines that we see today.
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain to us, first of all, I wonder if I can find a picture of a seraphim. Explain to us what the seraphim look like, and sort of piece together how that fits into David Icke, the Gnostic, telling us that the rulers are reptilians and child eaters, etc. But where did that come from? It's not from another distant planet. Where did it come from? And then how does that form into the rulers that we have today and them looking like clowns?
Yes. So, like I said, seraphim angels, the word seraph, the namesake, literally means fiery flying serpent. So they're dragons. Okay. And all over the earth are dragons, symbolized everywhere. China is the land of the dragon. There's many mythos of dragons in talking and communing with the Jade Emperor. So that's God. That's their analogous version of God and his helpers, the dragons, and that's what the specific class of angels looks like. There are many other classes of angels that don't look like dragons, but this is a very specific one, and they are the closest to God. They can get close to him. Like God's like an all-encompassing flame of light, but they have these 6 wings that protect them as they're always depicted. But they have this human form. You can see the head peeking out from the wings, you know what I mean? But they're being protected by the feet of the body and the head. But it seems like the shapeshifters as well, angels don't have to take any particular form. They can do whatever they want. They're not constrained to our 3D understanding of basic reality and matter. They are beyond all of that. They're beings of light. But their main form, or at least the form that they dominated with, was as dragons. Big, long, wiggly, multicolored, crazy looking, wide grinning, buck teeth, bulging eyed serpents that were just huge. But they can clearly take some kind of form that allows them to copulate with women as well. So it's not like they were constrained at all. And maybe it wasn't conventional sex either. But I seem to think all the evidence outside of the Bible proves it was conventional sex. There's plenty of tales of the pantheon of the Greek gods, of Zeus raping many women, kings, the daughters and queens, have killed the kings of other nations to introduce his own offspring into legitimate lineages of rulership and kingship over the earth. And they call them demigods, you know. But you have to understand, if you mix something like a fiery flying serpent dragon thing with a human woman, you don't get something that looks human as a result of that. And the evidence for this is actually all over the earth. Now, you have the dragons, they're one thing, they're celestial, huge non-corporeal beings that are just unfathomably beyond our comprehension, you know. But then you have this earthly species that kind of is on Earth, which is like a hybrid dragon human hybrid. And they go by many names. One famous example, going to Australia there in the Kimberley region of East Australia, you have the Wanginas. Now, I'm not allowed to talk about them because I'm a non-Indigenous white man. So that's kind of the attitude they have towards these type of things. That's ours. You're not allowed to discuss it. But when you actually look into it, during the dreaming, the ancient time before time, where there was the eternal dream of spirit and matter as one, the rainbow serpents, so the fiery flying serpents, the seraphim angels from a biblical perspective, created a human form offspring called the Wangina, which taught mankind how to build civilization. And they were also the bringers of rain and the knowledge and wisdom and all sorts of things. And if you look at the depictions of the Wanginas on these rock carvings all over the caves in the Kimberley region, they look like clowns. And I'm not even joking. I'm not even it's literally a straight comparison, side by side, red wig, red nose, white skin, big glowing blue eyes, a white ruffle around the neck, a polka dot costume with pom-poms going down the center. All of it's there. And it's because when you mix dragons, serpents with humans, you get a serpent-human hybrid. And all my work is proving is that what we call the clown today in the Western world is a copy of these examples found all over the earth and every continent of the Nephilim. It's kind of a caricatured amalgam symbol created by Freemasons, and I've got the history to prove it all, to basically create a costume that can be used to channel the spirits of these now dead entities. Because there's this principle, which is well understood in all these ancestor spirit cultures that kind of do this, is you dress like things to channel things. So you dress like the spirits to be embodied by the spirit, to be inhabited by the spirit. And it seems like this method has been transferred into the West by creating the costume of a clown. And
just showing the Wangina now, so that everybody could see that.
Yeah. That's it, and we're not supposed to know that a clown represents anything spiritual. It's an occult symbol. It's hidden. It's not for the profane masses to understand. We're just supposed to see it as a bit of fun for the kids for a circus. Nothing harmless fun, But when you actually look at the costume of a clown and as I do on my channel and have done over a 44 episode series spanning over 8 years and now have the first book published on this, you can see the aesthetical similarities throughout all these cultures who venerate their ancestors. They all dress like clowns too, or at least have 5 out of the 10 features that we would call clown-like all varied throughout, because they're dressing like something very specific and they call them their ancestors, but they're not talking about your aunties and uncles, your grandma and granddads, your great-great-grandma. They're talking about the ancient builders of the civilization and the culture creators, the gods, primordial ancient gods. They're talking about the Nephilim from a biblical standpoint, and they all have the same look about them. So what the occultists in the West have done is create the clown costume, copying all these examples from other cultures, and they wear it for the same reason these ancestor spirit culture worshippers do, to channel the spirits of the disembodied Nephilim, for many reasons. It's a transactional process, and maybe we can get into that detail as we go on.
Sure. So when I was at uni, I studied fine arts and design, but also I've got a theatre degree. And when I studied theatre, we were taught that the clowns came from Italy, from the Commedia dell'arte. Mm-hmm. We were not taught that it was anything ancient. We were taught a specific thing, that it was, that maybe, jesters were possibly part of this clown culture, and, that it was just representing certain archetypes, etc. So mm-hmm. You're saying that they are essentially, would it be the witch doctors and those sorts of shamans? Were they the ones that were dressing like the clowns in these in a lot of these cultures, these
It,
indigenous cultures around the
it
world?
it varies from culture to culture, and as I go through my channel, they all have their own way of and flavor and style of doing these things. But they're all fundamentally communicating with the same entities. Now, shamanism it varies from continent to continent, but you do find repeat patterns of a wide brimmed hat of some kind with feathers or ornate flowers or something of the sorts, with a multicolored robe of some fashion or a patchwork robe. And yes, they are generally seen as the mediator between the spirit realm for the tribe. They're the ones that do put on the costume to communicate specifically with the entities on behalf of the tribe, because the tribe are usually in fear of these entities, and it takes an expert to deal with it, you know. So it's kind of, and the shaman plays many roles in many cultures. It's as a healer or a, you know, mainly a medicine man of some kind, or a mediator between family disputes, or something to communicate with the gods to bring good harvest or stop the rain or bring the rain or whatever each geographical location requires. Because if you live in a place full of drought, like let's say the southern plains or the Hopi regions of America, then it's useful for the sacred clowns to dress like the Wakinyan spirit, which looks like a clown, by the way, with black and white fractal lines, to say, please bring the rain. These are the rain gods, the thunder gods. So the shaman will dress like the Wakinyan, do the dances and the sacrifices and the rituals, channel the spirit, and then plead with the spirit in like some interpersonal drama between the spirit realm and the physical realm of, please bring rain, we're dying of thirst here. But if you go to the northern plains of America, to more like the Dakota tribes, let's say, they dress in the same way, to dress like the Wakinyan spirit, to say, please stop the rain, you're destroying everything, we don't want any more thunder or storms. So they have their own reasons for communicating with spirits. It's a transactional thing, but the shaman usually plays that role in many of these societies. And they even call, we in the West call them clown societies, because they play quite a specific contrarian role in those American regions specifically.
Like the Hayoka?
Exactly.
Is the Hayoka? Yeah, yeah.
It's one example. The Hayoka
Yeah.
is more of a southern example. Well, it goes by many names all over the continent of America. But if you go all the way down south to the very southern tip of South America, you have this other culture. The name's actually evading me now, but they're basically the Selknam peoples. They're all but extinct now, unfortunately, due to, you know, they say through historical records, colonialization and things like this. But they were basically encroaching on colonists' land to steal their sheep, and they kept getting killed. So their numbers dwindled quite quickly through this horrible war, basically. But you look at their traditions, and they dress the same way as the Wakinyan worshipping North Americans with the polka dots, black and white fractal line pattern clothing. But they dress like the demons to initiate the young men into becoming men through this ritual. And they dress like them to say, we are demons coming to attack you, and you are warding us off and therefore becoming a man. And they have their own reasons for doing these things. But the aesthetical similarities start to become very apparent. So you go across to other cultures, they don't always have a shaman. Sometimes any member of the tribe can dress this way to make a deal with the demons for power and strength. You find a lot of African ancestor spirit worship tribes, this happens quite a lot. But then you go to India and you find they have this one guy who isn't a shaman, but he's the one that's been chosen to put the costume on, like, so say the Thayam cultures of the south, the western coast of India. They would basically dress in this really elaborate thing, you know, and they don't have to be a shaman. It's just like, it's your turn, basically, or something along those lines, or like, you're the son of a guy who did it last time, so you should keep doing the family tradition type of thing. And lo and behold, he does the right ritual. He drinks the blood of the chicken and bites the head off and all these type of things. He gets possessed. And then the tribe comes to the spirit and says, what can I do about this family problem? I want more money. How am I going to do this? And they ask it for advice and information and knowledge. But if you go to more African warlord regions, it's beneficial to be possessed by a demon to make a deal by whiting the skin up, putting colors on the faces, polka dots in many ways, red headdresses, doing the dances, taking the drugs, and, you know, mimicking the spirits. And then they basically say, give me the ability not to be stabbed and not bleed. Give me the ability to have the strength of 10 men, which is beneficial if you're in a warring tribal area. So everyone has their own reasons for doing this. But what I've done is gone to all these places, mapped out their reasonings, but then let's just remove all that, because it's basically, it's irrelevant. What you see is they all have the same style, because they're all communicating with the exact same thing. Because the only thing on the other side are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. And there's been a huge coercive spiritual warfare effort to hide that fact and to blur the lines and to make people think, well, there's good spirits and there's bad spirits and there's nature spirits, and they've turned it into this big, long,
Thank you.
complicated thing. But it's
Yeah.
not that complicated. It really is black and white when it comes to this, and people don't like that kind of
They don't.
tautological view. They think it's being myopic, it's silly, it's foolish, it's naive. I would say actually you're being naive in thinking these things are your friends when you don't actually know the historical context for why they're there. There's a reason they're there, and they're not your
Thank you
friends.
so much, Paul.
So
Thank you.
getting to the
Go.
jesters and the story of where we get a clown from in the West. You're right with the commedia dell'arte that comes out of the Roman and Greek traditions of Greek theatre, Roman theatre, and mimicry and mimes and stupidus and all these type of characters that came out of Roman mask comedy. But with the collapse of Rome in the well, you know why I'm talking about with dates and times here. But let's just go off the official record as we know it. You know, with the collapse of Rome in 500 AD to about 1500 AD, we have this period of time where Christendom was taking over, and actors were kind of seen as frivolous, waste of time prostitutes who pretend to be things they're not. So they're basically paid liars. It was frowned upon to be an actor. It's like being a whore. You know, you're getting paid to pretend to be something you're not. It's not good, you know. So they kind of ended up out of work, a lot of these stage performers in Rome, and they ended up creating traveling troupes called the Commedia dell'arte. This tradition went on for 1,000 years, and it's kind of dissipated now. Maybe there are still some troupes that do it, but it's not like it was. And these were basically the first traveling circus. They would have a tent or like a stage, and they would go to a village, town, square, whip up this stage, and they'll put their masks on and their silly costumes, and they'd do shows, improvised shows, and everyone would put money in a hat for them and throw money at them, and then they'd move on to the next village and do it again and again and again and again, and they'd improvise, and they kind of like come up with like routines that were popular with people, and the characters were what were known as stock characters. So no matter where they went, you'd recognize the character. That's the soldier. That's the rich man. That's the rich man's daughter. That's the servant. Everyone knew who they were, whatever country, whatever language, and they traveled to every country. But they all spoke Italian, but they were in Spain or France or Portugal or even as far as Russia. It doesn't matter, you know. They just did a performance, and it's mainly physical comedy, so they didn't need many words anyway. You know what I mean? But they had these characters they knew everyone could understand. So that's where the comedy came from, and the routines got more complex, and each country then began creating their own tradition modeled after it, and it became huge. It was funny. It was everywhere, you know, and they were actually quite funny. That's the thing. So of course it was popular in otherwise quite drab times. And yeah, people enjoyed it enough that like stages were created in Britain, modeled after this old tradition. It's where we get the pantomime from. France had their own tradition based on this, and that's where you get Poirot the clown from, which is the white cone, black pom poms, frilly loose dress, white faced clown, and that's the French version of Pedrolino. Pedrolino was the Italian original tradition of the servant character of the rich man. And that's where we get clown from. So clown is modeled after the servant of the rich man. France did Poirot, and he was like a sad sack clown, always crying because the daughter of the rich man, Columbine, she wants Harlequin. She doesn't want me, you know. And why does she love Harlequin and not me? Oh, woe is me. My life is miserable, and everyone laughs at me at my expense, you know. A sad clown. That's a very French way of doing things, isn't it? Pretty typical. But then in Britain didn't see the clown that way. They saw the clown as more irreverent, funny, a bad servant, and didn't care. Hated his boss, whatever, you know what I mean? He was always drunk and eating sausages and really just outrageous. Never did his job right. And in that tradition, this is the British pantomime. You'd have this moment where Harlequin would steal the daughter of the rich man and run away. And then a Looney Tunes chase scene would happen on the stage, and the stage would keep changing, and they'd fall through holes and jump through windows trying to chase after the daughter of the rich man and Harlequin. Because the rich man would get his other servant, clown, Pedrolino, Poirot, and say, come with me, we need to get my daughter back. And that was the comedy. That chase was the comedy for like an hour and a half on the British stage. And it was just huge, brilliant. But at this point, clown still looked like the traditional Pedrolino. White, completely white, Elizabethan servant rags. Nothing special. Nothing outrageous. Nothing like a clown we call today. Not even no colorful face paint, nothing like that. just plain white rags. And that was the tradition for 1,000 years. It hadn't changed. Okay. Now, Harlequin was only introduced in about the 1500s. And it was very late to the game because, and he's kind of the first proto clown. So I have to talk about Harlequin here because he kind of looked like a clown from the beginning. He had multicolored clothes. And he's modeled after what's called the wild man tradition of Europe. So this traveling troupe went to all the countries in Europe and far north, and to Russia as well. And they noticed it doesn't matter where we go, they all have this tradition called the wild man tradition, and it's this festival around. It kind of got pagan festivals, Dionysian, Thracian culture festivals, kind of getting transferred into Catholic like feasts, so like Fat Tuesday and Lent and all these type of things. They'd have this party before this period of fasting where they'd dress like multicolored fractal beast monsters with wide grinning teeth and bulging eyes and colorful clothing and ribbons and all sorts of wild things. And they were supposed to be the wild man. The wild man is quintessentially the European flavor of Nephilim. They are giant man-eating monsters who wield giant clubs, who basically dominated an ancient past enough to leave this mark on the collective memory of everybody who lived in Europe, living in fear of this wild, giant man-eating beast. So they had these parties where they dressed like demons, which specifically had this look about them. And the Commedia dell'arte saw it and said, let's make a new stock character. Let's create Harlequin. Harlequin is named after Helikins, which is the French version of the wild man. And Helikins was known and documented by his 10th century monk, actually, as witnessing him, roving with his band of little demons, this giant with a club. And he went through this village in the 10th century France, and Helikins was this beast who basically just ravaged the village, you know. So they used that name, Helikins, and you got Hurricane and Harlequin from the Italian translation. And that's it. That's where you get Harlequin from. He is literally a model of Nephilim demons. And he wore white rags, first of all, with a brutish black mask with the nose upturned and these angry looking eyes, but multicolored patches of hair all over his skin, polka dot multicolors. So he was modeled after what people had seen, which are these clown looking hairy beast monsters. Now, they are hairy in Europe because Europe's cold. So their flavor of Nephilim were hairier than, let's say, the hot, arid climates of the Rakshasa demons of India, which are all naked. It's different, you know. I think they adapted to wherever they lived, just like all creatures do, you know. But a snake is still a snake at the end of the day, no matter what it looks like or what color its spots are. So that's basically where you get Harlequin. And he was also a servant of the rich man. So the early comedy came from Harlequin, this demonic, quick-witted, fast-footed, rude, crude, vicious character, playing off the slow, dim-witted Pedrolino, the other servant who was stupid and dumb. And that's the comedy. Smart versus dumb. You know, that was the comedy humor of the Commedia dell'arte movement for many years, until you got this pantomime creation from British culture, which was the chase scene I mentioned earlier. Harlequin the demon steals the daughter, and Pedrolino the servant and the rich man run after them. So there's many ways it comes about, but in terms of costume change, Harlequin's costume got tighter and it got more diamond shaped, as we traditionally call Harlequin patterns today. Still multicolored though, but he stopped being so demonic by like the 1800s, so the middle 1700s, 1800s. He lost that edge because he had his club, but he was the slapstick, and he would whip the stage and change the scene. He had magical powers, you know what I mean? He could almost seem like he could fly with the acrobatics he was pulling off. Because he also had this Italian flavor of like Dionysus and Mercury mixed in with him, you know, mixed in with this northern brutish giant mythology. So he was an amalgam character, but he lost his edge. He wasn't like sticking his stick up people's backsides anymore. He was doting after the daughter of the rich man. He became like a lovesick fool rather than a quick-witted demon. And people were bored of him. But in Britain, the British Pedrolino was so hilarious. He was just like the original Harlequin. He was acting like the original demon Harlequin used to be. And I think with that loss of Harlequin going into a background character, Clown replaced the vacuum that was left behind by Harlequin and became the new demonic character. And with that change in character in 1799, there was a son of a famous Freemason called Charles Dibdin Jr.,
who was given the job of heading up the theatre at the time, the Sadler's Wells Theatre. And he came in and basically shook things up. He wanted to make his mark on the industry, they say. But I don't believe any of this. This is where I'm getting into my theory and what was really going on here. At the time, there was a young actor called Joseph Grimaldi who was making waves in that time. He'd always been in the theatre. His family was always been a part of the theatre. His father, Signor Grimaldi, came from Italy, was the dentist of Queen Charlotte, but then went off to start his own acting school before becoming one of the head clowns and actors at Sadler's Wells and the Royal Theatre of London. And his son, Joseph, was always with him and was raised in the theatre. And obviously his father dies. Joseph, being well connected as he is, marries the daughter of the man who owns the Sadler's Wells Theatre, Maria Hughes. Richard Hughes is the guy who owns this theatre. His daughter, Maria, marries Joseph Grimaldi, a young actor in the industry, you know. But she dies at childbirth and he loses both his child and wife. So Joseph has a very depressed, manic breakdown. But his wife's last words to Richard, her father, were, "Look after Joe. Please look after poor Joe." And she died. So Richard Hughes took that seriously and he went to this new young showrunner he had just hired to run the theatre for him. Richard Hughes was a busy, powerful man. He didn't have time to actually run the theatre. He hired people to do that for him. So he went to this new young director, who, by the way, was the son of his best friend, Charles Dibdin. So they're all friends, helping each other out, you know what I mean? And Charles Dibdin Sr., pretty big deal. He was like a powerful music mogul of the day. He wrote songs for maritime sailors that got them through the war. He was thanked for the music he created. They still play one of his songs, Tom Bowling, at the end of the proms every year to this day. Tom Bowling was named after his brother, who died in India, colonizing it through the East India Company. But he had a son who he named after himself, Charles Dibdin Jr., and he went to his mate, Richard Hughes. "Have you got a job for him?" And Richard said, "Yeah, you can head up my theatre for him." So he got this young lad in and said, "You give Joseph a leading role. You make him the star, because my daughter on her deathbed is making me do this. Like, you know, he's not my son-in-law anymore, but I'm still going to look after him, you know." So this is what Charles Dibdin Jr. does. He makes him the head clown, which is the big role at that time because clown's the most popular character. He debased a prominent actor at the time, Dubois, who was quite known as a classical actor. But Joseph was just so funny. He was so hilarious. He upstaged Dubois in no time, and Dubois was old news before you knew it, you know. And this young actor, Joseph Grimaldi, was like the funniest guy you've ever met. He was just hilarious. You look at all these accounts, like people could not go and see Joseph Grimaldi be the clown and not leave like peeing themselves with laughter. Like he was just something else, almost satanic in nature, like beyond otherworldly to witness, you know. He was all clown. Like everything about him was clown. But his private life was really depressing. Pretty stereotypical, like a dead wife and child, manic depression breakdown. He shot himself in the foot with a prop gun and his skin was coming off. A horrible, painful life. He was conned repeatedly, lost all of his money. It was just his first son later dies of alcoholism in the future. Honestly, Joseph Grimaldi's life is a misery.
He's had a really shocking life. Is he the first sort of sad clown or the
No.
clown? No,
that's
not.
that the early French actors who came up with Poirot were the sad clowns.
Poirot, yeah.
But the British clown, popularized by Joseph Grimaldi, was hilariously brutish and witty and demonic in nature, you know.
Do you think that they were channeling? He was channeling anything at the time in that costume, in that?
Well, who knows? Because this is where something weird happened. So, like I said earlier, the costume of a clown had always just been plain white servant rags, modeled after the Italian Pedrolino and the French Poirot. But Joseph was dressed in something brand new. And this was done because of Charles Dibdin Jr. He wanted to make his mark on the industry. So he changed the costume of clown, Pedrolino, Poirot, to be this psychedelic, fractal colored, multicolored, weird looking, monstrous thing, which is nightmare fuel by today's standards when you go and look at these old first costumes of a clown, you know. And Joseph Grimaldi, you know, kind of made it his own. He embodied that costume and rolled with it. You know, but he didn't create the costume. Charles Dibdin Jr. did. But everyone's always equated Joseph Grimaldi with being the father of modern clowns. He was the guy who created that look. He didn't. He was just the guy who wore the costume first, but he didn't make the costume. It was the
So
son.
it was a Freemason.
It was
basically.
it was the son of a very
Yeah.
powerful Freemason of the day, Charles Dibdin.
Amazing.
And Charles Dibdin was intimately linked with India. So this is the elder, Charles Dibdin, the elder. He was his brother was colonizing Calcutta, East India. He was a part of the East India Company. And he had moved back and forth to visit his brother many times. He was even going to move in his memoirs. He was planning on moving to India permanently, but he couldn't set sail because of bad weather and changed his mind and stayed in England instead. And so he loved India and knew India quite well. This is a traveling man. This is a Freemason. He was a member of the Leicestershire Lodge, number 2369, I think it was. He has memorable eulogies written to him in the old records of the Freemasonic Lodge. You can go and find, and I've got them in my book. He was a Freemason, powerful media mogul. He was a rich man with huge influence, and he loved India. And it's highly likely he was inspired by the Rakshasa demons of India specifically. And what he did was bring that back with him. His son was probably also intimately linked with India, because, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And you look at the first costume Joseph Grimaldi wore, it's an identical copy of the costumes worn by the Rakshasa demons on the Thailand temples. It's identical. It's a carbon copy. They modeled the clown in the 1800s after Rakshasa demons of India.
Rakshasa demons.
So Harlequin.
I wanted to ask you about that before you go on about India.
Are you tired of the same old conversations? Do you often find yourself struggling to know what to say? Are you over discussing the news, sports ball, or the weather? It's time to put boring discussions behind you by leaving a copy of The Nephilim Look Like Clowns on your coffee table, your toilet, your local library, mother's car, boss's office desk, or that person you really likes bed instead.
What the hell is this?
Oh, that? Why, it's just a book about how the modern costume of a clown is a caricature of ancient giants and modern demons.
Stay away from my children.
This is a conversation you can't wait to have.
My family used to think I was crazy, but thanks to The Nephilim Look Like Clowns, they know I'm crazy.
The Nephilim Looks Like Clowns. It's no laughing matter.
Have you heard of the Agori in India? They're the ones. I just want to know if they were part of the whole Nephilim influence, because they're the cannibal sect from the Hindu. Have you heard of them? They're kind of like witch doctors, and they're just foul and disgusting, but they're obsessed with death, and they sort of cover themselves in ashes of the dead people, and
skulls and all the rest of it.
Yeah, skulls, etc.
Well,
is that part of the same thing?
They're just a sect of Hindu worshippers who venerate specifically that the spirits of the dead, which specifically are these man-eating giants. I mean, India's religion is so diverse that I couldn't even describe one religion that wouldn't contradict another part of the continent's religion in some way. But they have the Asuras and the Rakshasas, and they say there's good and bad and many gray areas in between. But I'm purely looking at aesthetics here. I don't care about the culture's myths they've surrounded themselves with specifically. If you just look at the aesthetics of a Rakshasa, it's identical to, let's say, the Gorgons in Greece. If they are the same creature, they're probably not far removed from the Wanjinas as well, but every culture kind of has their own specific way of depicting Nephilim, and each region has their own stylistic, unique variants. Like I said, Europe has hairier Nephilim than India does, for example. You know what I mean? It's different. There's differences. Not all snakes are a monolith. You have cobras do not look the same as corn snakes. There's variants, between the way the Nephilim would have looked in this way. But they were very colorful. They had very wide mouths because they were serpents. They could dislocate their jaws to eat their prey, just like a snake, I imagine. So they had big smiles from the front, but they just had very wide mouths. They had buck-sharp teeth up and down, fangs. They had wild, bulging eyes. Oh, yeah.
A lot of them had red hair.
Red hair, golden hair, multicolored fractal pattern skin, a predominantly white base with colors on top of it. That
just reminds me of Queen Elizabeth I. So do you think that, you said that a lot of the frilly collar as well was part of the costume with the clowns. with Queen Elizabeth having the red hair, the white makeup, and the frilly neck, and her possibly more than likely being from the Nephilim bloodlines, do you think that that anything from her era would have been influencing any of the clowns or jesters of that time, or costuming? Or
well, yeah, you have to understand jesters are a mimic of royalty. So jesters primarily come from the same tradition of these out of work Roman actors from the newly christened nations, you know, and because it was kind of like hard for them to find work, they didn't really struggle to get hired for private comedians for rich people and for kings. Who's going to argue with the king, you know, if he can have his own personal jester? And it kind of became like a hot commodity to have a jester. It was a sign of affluence, you know, and the actors would gladly take on that personal role. Like I'm a personally hired actor for this specific influential person, and my job is to make them laugh. But what he would do is he would dress like the king. And that's where traditional jester costumes come from. It's a mockery of the king's costume. So jesters actually have very little to do with this theory or Nephilim. But then you find like Harlequin later on in the 1500s has a jesterish look about him, you know. So it's kind of, it was clearly influenced by that point to incorporate jester style into the Harlequin costume. But primarily, the jester costume is just a mockery of the king. That's all it ever has been. And it's developed throughout the cultures, obviously, with these festivals like Carnival. The jester has taken on a more etheric look as time has gone on. They got a bit more white-faced, over-exaggerated, multicolour fractal pattern looks to it as time has developed. But it's kind of because Harlequin's influence went into the jester as well. It was like a bleed through. But they're not really clowns.
Right. Yeah, they're not. No. I guess I'm thinking that along those lines because of the mockery of the royal, you know.
But there's something there. And obviously, like I said, Queen Elizabeth does have all the quintessential traits of Nephilim features: pale white skin. She has ginger hair. It's not red. Ginger. The Nephilim had red.
Oh, they had red, like Ronald McDonald red.
Red.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not like ginger people.
It wasn't.
No. So
I never knew that.
I'm not one to kind of say like ginger people are the descendants of the Nephilim.
No.
You know, I don't believe that's the case. I think some of these royals and these bloodlines like to believe themselves to have angel blood in them. So they believe they ought to have this divine right to rule or something like that. But you start blurring the lines into like eugenics and the outcomes you can start to get to when you start going down this some people aren't human route. It's not good. Well, so what are you going to do? Kill them all? Is that your solution? You know, it ends up going to very dark genocidal places when you start making those type of connections. I don't think they look human at all, the Nephilim. Not even close to human. I don't think there's any human today that truly has much Nephilim blood in them, if any, you know, compared to what these things actually look like. I don't think that's the case.
But you go into all of this in your book. I don't want to labor the thing too long, but you go into all of this in great detail in your book, and you've got a playlist on your channel as well with you. Is it with you reading parts of the book or?
No. The playlist is something that where it all started. So in 2016, you know, I had all this knowledge going on in my head about Nephilim, and I saw the creepy clown sightings in 2016, and it kind of sparked something in my mind because I had already had my own psychedelic experiences. I knew a lot about DMT jesters, you know, and I'd listened to everything Terence McKenna had ever said or written in his entire life, and I knew about the self-transforming machine elves and all this type of stuff, and I had my own vision of a giant jester as well in the DMT realm. So I knew there was something there that looks like a jesterish psychedelic fractaled clown monster of some kind. And it was a common occurrence. But I didn't make the connection to the Nephilim until this 2016 clown sighting thing happened. And I knew, okay, so forget the fact that there's people dressed like clowns. It can be put up to a hoax or a stunt or something. You can put up to just a bit of fun for Halloween. The point was every single media station was talking about it, small or large, national, international, it doesn't matter. Every Anglosphere speaking continent from Canada to North America to England to Europe was talking about this. It was happening everywhere. And it's kind of like nothing gets on that square box in the corner of your living room if the controllers don't want it there. There's something about the clown that means something to these people. It's a symbol. I knew that immediately because I knew enough about how the occult works. What could the clown mean? And I just things fired in my head, and I started saying, so if people see jesters in the DMT realm, and the DMT realm is literally just the other side of the earth where that we no longer perceive, that was limited to us in the times of Noah when he put a rainbow in the sky. You now only perceive the light spectrum of these colors. You can't see beyond it anymore to hide the Nephilim from us, because now they're disembodied spirits walking on the earth. If you can still see them, they'll corrupt you again. So if you take DMT and open up your perceptions, you're just seeing more of the earth. And lo and behold, the spirits that now dwell there is like a parasite stuck in the machine of the ghost in the machine, shall we say. I don't think the DMT realm's a special place. I think it's the plumbing of our universe. It's the stuff behind the walls that needs to be there to make the thing function. But you don't need to know about the plumbing. There's experts that deal with that. You don't need to go there and go exploring, and see what rats are within the walls and all these type of things. I think the DMT realm is a perfectly normal, functioning place that needs to exist. It's a part of the earth, but it's just the code that projects the reality which you want to be in. Here, embodied. It's the place of disembodied forms. And they are desperate to get back into this realm where they can have a body and be
where they can have a body,
be gods among men again,
and not be in the dry places anymore.
The dry places, yeah. But the thing is, they look like jesters. That's the predominant view. So I knew something that looks like clowns is there. And then this thing happens in 2016. I'm like, so are clowns in some way connected to demons? Because if demons are the disembodied spirits of Nephilim, they look like jesters. And I rolled with it in 2016. And like I said, these connections just kept coming. And here I am, like 8 years later, with 44 episodes dedicated to fleshing all of this out. And it turns out, historically speaking, as I've been explaining here, it was done on purpose in the 1800s. It was injected into popular media. And when you look at where the costume came from, it's modeled after Indian versions of demons. And the Harlequin was modeled after European versions of the Nephilim, which are demons. So clowns have always been a representation of the demonic. Now, the real issue comes from, what does it mean to dress like that? What's the consequences of dressing in such a way? We don't think there is such an issue with dressing like anything in the West. We're not that superstitious. But every other culture on the earth knows that dressing this way is to channel the ancestors or the Nephilim or the spirits. Yeah. So when we do it, does us being ignorant of that make a difference? I don't think so. I think the consequences are the same. Yeah.
I just wanted to talk to you about the etheric realm and something that happened to me so I've never taken drugs. I didn't do DMT or anything like that. The way I accessed that realm was through hypnotic regression, altered states of consciousness, through meditation and psychic practices. Because as a psychic, I was seeing all of these things. One of my first videos was me seeing underground in what you would call the astral realm, but I saw hell. I could see what was going on, and I was describing that. That was one of my first videos. But something that happened to me, and this is before I understood really what your work was about the Nephilim look like clowns. I had a hypnotic regression, and it was an expert hypnotherapist who did entity release, meaning, trying to remove demons. Now, in the New Age, they call them entities, and they take various forms, etc. And of course, a lot of Gnostic language, instead of calling them demons, or we did call them, some of them demons, they were archons, which are essentially the watchers, right? Mm-hmm. And she got to a spot. So you go through different parts of the body, and I was seeing visions in my head as these things were being pulled out of me through the hypnotic regression. And there was one that called itself an archon, and it was hooked into my liver in the, in a different realm. And I saw its face, and I swear to you, it looked like a mask of, it was black and white, and it had like a comedy tragedy mask type thing, long head, long pointy jaw, very exaggerated caricature type look, and it called itself an archon. Mm-hmm. And it started to describe that it was ancient and all of these things. And they were projecting images to me of their lives, and it was almost like their life on earth as Nephilim. But I was so shocked. I actually drew the picture of what it looked like, and you could only describe it as a clown looking comedy type, you know, face. So there's no other way to describe it.
Wow.
So I'm just fascinated that you have pieced all of this together in such a profound way, and then that it cross references with other researchers as well. A lot like with Gary Wayne's work, and he sort of goes deeper into, you know, the history and well, you do too, but in terms of piecing together through the Bible, through biblical scripture, of all of this to prove it to everybody. Can you just I do want to touch on other subjects as well, just really
Sure.
about the little season as well, but everybody can get, I'm going to put your links into the description of where to get your book. I think it'll be a fabulous Christmas present. If you've still got enough time, you might be able to get it. But I'd really, really love to talk about the little season, and just you did an amazing presentation yesterday with JT follows JC, Joe from that channel. And you were reviewing this video of how we've got this missing time in our timeline. And you were reviewing the work of is it it's Gunnar
Heinsohn, yes.
Gunnar Heinsohn. So could you explain to people, the lay people out there who aren't aware of what this topic of why some of us who are believing the historical proof in the Bible of Jesus's resurrection, etc., that some of us actually believe that Jesus already came, and what that means to us in end time prophecies, etc. Could you sort of give us a little rundown of the little season means, etc.?
Sure. I mean, that's a monumental task in this day and age. But I'll do what I can as best I can for your audience now, who I know may be coming from various different levels of understanding of even just about Christendom in general and what it means to be Christian.
Just a sequence of events,
Yeah, so, I mean, but in terms of putting out a perfect chronology, I mean, this is the issue. This is what we're finding with being conspiracy theorists as well as Christians, is our timeline does not make much sense. And there are huge discrepancies with the timings of events and the placing of disasters throughout timelines. And you have to understand the predominant worldview of most Christians, conspiracy theorists or not, just Christendom in general, is that we're waiting for Christ to return and establish his millennial kingdom. And before that can happen, we have to go through Revelation 16, which is the tribulation event, which is basically mass destruction of biblical proportions, in which everything is fully annihilated and an old corrupt world is destroyed. And Christ then resurrects people at the end of this destruction who stayed faithful to him. We call these the saints, who get to take part in the first resurrection, and they get to rule with Christ for 1,000 years. So this is what people are waiting for now. This is what Christians are all talking about. This is what rapture's all about. It's about, I get to be taken up before all the bad stuff happens, and then I get to come back after the bad stuff is over and rule with Christ, and it's all this stuff. And these are the predominant mainstream churchianity views. And I say churchianity because it's a little bit different from truth and Christendom and what Christianity actually is. Now, I'm a conspiracy theorist Christian. I'm a Christian first, but I'm also a conspiracy theorist. And we are not the same as most Christians. We do not represent what the churches are preaching more often than not. And there are a lot of truthers online who are basically just boilerplate Christians. They're not truthers. They call themselves that because they believe Jesus Christ is the truth, the way, and the life. So they define themselves as truthers based on that basic biblical principle. But we are not that. And we have carved for ourselves in the corner of conspiracy culture as Christians this very new trailblazing type understanding of biblical eschatology. Eschatology is the study of the end times, and we've come up with a new idea. And it's not new. There have been people in the past who have had similar ideas, but what we've come up with is more of a realistic understanding of these old principles. So these old principles are known as preterism, and the idea is that in 70 AD, pretty much all of prophecy was fulfilled with the destruction of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And that was the judgment tribulation event, the judgment on the Jewish people who rejected Christ in 70 AD. And then Christ established his millennial reign then. But they mainly believe it was a spiritual concept. Christ was now in the hearts and ruling from heaven, and that trickle down effect came to the earth, and then Christendom took over. And there is evidence for that through the Byzantine Empire, a Christian empire out of the Roman Empire, which lasted for 1,000 years. So they have this idea it's kind of already happened. But they tend to believe in full preterism, that Satan's little season has already happened as well, and we're now living in the new heaven and earth after all of this. Then there's partial preterism, which believes, yes, in 70 AD, most of these things have come to pass, but we're still waiting for the final new heaven and earth to come after the little season. And that's kind of roughly where we are in the conspiracy world. We're not waiting for Christ to return. We believe it already happened a long time ago. And we're now in this nebulous little bit of time after the 1,000-year reign of Christ ends. And it does say it ends in Revelation 20, chapter 7. It says, when the 1,000 years has ended, Satan is let loose from his prison. And you have to understand, this 1,000 years is basically 1,000 years where the devil is locked up and where Christ can rule with his resurrected saints, as we mentioned earlier. And humanity is no longer restrained or bothered by the devil. That's basically what it means. So it doesn't say 1,000-year reign of Christ. It's 1,000 years where the devil's locked up. And imagine what humanity could do in that time, let's say. Anyway, the short season is where we are claiming we are now, this time after the 1,000 years. And it says, when it's ended, the devil's let loose to deceive all the nations for a short period of time, deceive all the nations and gather an army whose number is of the sands of the sea, from Gog and Magog of the four corners of the earth, to make war with and surround the camp of saints. And then once that happens, fire comes down from heaven, destroys everything, and then it's final great white throne judgment at the end of everything. And once judgment has taken place, there's then the new heaven and earth, in which those who made it into the Lamb's Book of Life get to continue on into, and everybody's resurrected with their new bodies, just as the saints were in the first resurrection. But this time we get to play out on the new heaven and earth. Now, most Christians are still way back in time in their mind, and we're still waiting after 2,000 years for Christ to turn up and start tribulation. And then after that, there's supposed to be another 1,000 years of peace, and then Satan's going to get let loose. And they don't really think about that far off thing in the distance of the Satan's little season, because to them it is like thousands of years away. So most churches don't talk about the little season of Satan, because from the eschatological worldview, it's irrelevant. That's nothing to do with us. We're still waiting for tribulation to happen. We're still waiting for Christ to come back after he ascended after Pentecost. We're still waiting for the end of the church age, as they say. We're still waiting for a temple to be built in which the Antichrist will stand in and declare himself to be God. And, the Jews have only just taken over Israel recently. So now they have to build a temple, and now we have to wait for the Antichrist to come into the temple. So they're building a temple for the Antichrist to go into. That's what we're waiting for. And you have to realize it all sounds like absolute nonsense, because it is, because that all already happened in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. And around this time, we're finding now new evidences to say, the first millennium is not 1,000 years long. It's 250 years long. And they've inserted 700 years into the timeline there. And we call it the Dark Ages because we don't really know what happened in that time. There's no evidence for anything happening in that time, because that time doesn't exist, is what we're discovering. And that presentation I talked about yesterday and went through with JT. I mean, this presentation isn't just it's not for like intermediary or beginners on this topic. It's come at the end of like a year's worth of constant discussion on this topic. And we found this presentation by an old German sociologist and economist who basically dabbles in chronology. He's like a man of many talents, and he was basically saying, let's go through all the evidence. And I laid it out in like a 4-hour presentation yesterday, and we went through every single point on there with him. And he's basically proven unequivocally that there's no evidence at all that the first millennium lasted for 1,000 years. But there's plenty of evidence to say there was one enormous disaster that completely wiped out all of civilization. Tribulation I'm talking about here. And after tribulation ended, there was an explosion of monasteries built all throughout the earth. And Christendom took full control. And from that point on, people had labeled it after Christ. And that's where time was changed forever.
Anno Domini, that's right. And this theory, the reason why I love it and it's only recently that I learned about it through your channel and a couple of others. I think it was through JT's channel as well, discussing it. It just solidifies and enlivens your faith. I don't know why Christians are rejecting it. I don't know why they're rejecting this idea that Jesus already fulfilled the prophecies. He's already come. This is a good thing. This is something. And when you see the evidence there, because everybody keeps saying, well, it doesn't add up. We were taught in history this X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't add up with that. And there's a reason. But us as conspiracy theorists on this channel, whether you're a Gnostic, a New Ager, whatever you are, you know that things don't add up.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? What are the mud floods? What are these beautiful structures that we're seeing everywhere? Why is it that in Australia we have these buildings that allegedly we built 20 minutes after coming on a ship from England? That doesn't add up either. And this sort of starts to make sense as to why the calendars were changed. We have this missing piece of history that they called the Dark Ages, and if it's early, so that means Jesus only resurrected not long ago. So you're saying it was about 800, I think we calculated yesterday. What was
the way it works is this. So what we call the first century, so the beginning of Roman rule, where Jerusalem was being occupied by Rome and Christ roamed, was doing his thing, and he died in 33 AD, we say, don't we?
33 AD, yeah.
And then obviously the destruction of the temple was in 70 AD, so only about less than 40 years later did he come back and fulfill his promise. And Josephus describes this, a Jewish historian from that century, describes it as chariots of fire in the sky raining down destruction on Jerusalem, and it's kind of, there were witnesses to that destruction event. And then there was the sudden collapse of Rome, the invasion of the barbarians, famines, destruction, just fire melting everything. And Rome was buried, quite literally buried, and it's kind of, there's no strata evidence that there's anything below them. But we're told it happened slowly through 3 separate destructive events separated by like 100, 200 years each. So the first century, there was a disaster, barbarian invasion. The 5th century, there was a disaster, mass plague, mini ice age, volcanoes. And then by the 9th century, another disaster, some kind of, I don't know, just more of the same, but it's not all 3 separate events. It was one event in the 1st century, but we started dating from the 8th century, picking up after the disaster. So 700, 77, let's say 750 AD or something like that. So realistically, the 1st century is the 8th century. That time in between doesn't actually exist. So there's 2 dates. So when I'm talking about the 1st century, I'm not talking about, it was actually the 8th century at the same time. You know what I mean? It gets complicated, but when you actually see it mapped out, it does make sense, because there is no 700-year gap there. That time does not exist. There's just there is no. So we're essentially in the 1300s or something like that. So basically it wasn't that long ago that the 1,000 years after that destruction ended. Do you get what I mean? It was actually
of course.
Christ is now 800 years closer to us than he was originally, and it's not. But even then, that doesn't matter, because people think it's been 2,000 years, and where's Christ? Where is he? He promised he promised he'd come back. You know what I mean? With his army in the clouds. Where's the promise of his coming, guys? You stupid Christians! As if it's been 2,000 years already. Don't you think maybe he was just a false prophet? He was wrong. He lied to you, and it's kind of, well, actually, there's plenty of evidence to say he came back exactly 40 years after he said he would, and dished out that destruction everywhere, reset everything, and established a Christ-centric kingdom afterwards, just like he promised. And we are living in the season after that happened. And it's called Satan's little season, where he's released and he takes over again for a short period. And what do we have today but a worldwide conspiracy of people who worship Lucifer and Satan in secret societies, all going towards a new world order and a re-establishment of Roman empirical rule in the Roman style, a one world order. This is religion. This is Satan's season, where he's gathering an army that all comes together under one banner, under one ideology, under one belief system, to make war with God. And I've theorized and speculated this explains the alien phenomena. And why we even have aliens as a concept.
100%.
It's because
100%.
people don't realize this, but in the end times, New Jerusalem, Zion, God's holy city descends from heaven to the center of the earth. And this changes the cosmology of things. I don't think this will be a new concept to most of your listeners, but we're living in an enclosed system. I describe it. I'm not going to talk about the shape necessarily.
No, most of them believe this. So
yeah. So, but in the
this.
center of this enclosed system, all eyes will see coming down from heaven a 1,600 mile by 1,600 mile by 1,600 mile dimensioned city coming down called New Jerusalem. And that's where Christ will reign for 1,000 years and forever and ever in the new heaven and earth. Now, we don't see that right now. It seems like it's been veiled or something, but it seems to be plenty of evidence that it was visible at some point, because we see it, for example, on coins and in stories and mythologies. There was at one point a floating city in the sky. Now that we don't see that anymore, probably because we're in the little season of Satan, it's not his time. He's been veiled, but it will get revealed again for the final judgment. He'll come back with his city, and that's what's going to get surrounded. That's the camp of saints. That's where the saints are. That's where Jesus and his resurrected saints are. They clearly went back to Jerusalem, to New Jerusalem, not this place in the Middle East everyone's looking at. We're talking about Mount Zion, the city of God, the floating city. Now, in the modern context, people today, forget Christianity, forget any religion. Let's just talk about people in general today from all cultures. If they saw a giant city floating in the sky that covered over continents, people are going to immediately assume alien mothership, because that's what the programming has prepared them for. They've all seen Independence Day and they've all heard Orson Welles' War of the Worlds and the tripods. And everyone for over 100 years has been inundated with space, aliens, and evolution, and all the rest of these doctrines that came up all in the 1800s, which would have been about 250 years ago when all these doctrines appeared, which, funnily enough, would have placed us at the end of that 1,000-year period I was talking about earlier, where Christ was ruling. Suddenly, Freemasons take over every industry and basically inundate us with false cosmology, false science and history. And everyone's been prepped to believe through evolution, through science, cosmology, false cosmology, vast infinite universes in space, that aliens will turn up eventually. And all the media prepped them for this eventuality where, boom, the mothership appears, And
they were waiting for the technology, basically, to be able to pull it off, right? That's
something. Well, yeah. Well, the thing is, it's kind of, we're all under the illusion, like it'll be Project Bluebeam or something, or it's the controllers faking an alien invasion. But the truth is, when New Jerusalem becomes visible again, that will be Jesus Christ in his floating city.
Wow.
Everyone will assume it's the enemy. Everyone's seen Endgame, right? And Thanos with his giant ship.
Yes.
Everyone assumes that we're under attack by aliens. And you know what they're going to do?
So even us that don't, that hate this whole alien agenda and we don't like it, we would also be against anything appearing in the sky, is what you're trying to say.
Because we've been prepared for that. Even the Christian conspiracy theorists think it's going to be a lie by Satan. It's all demons. But this is the rub, because they're not idiots. They're preparing for this eventuality when Jesus reveals himself again. They are preparing for it. That's what the programming's for, to give us the right opinion when it happens, so we follow their agenda when it appears. And it's their damage control. But they're also working on their own flying saucers, their own chimera hybrid monsters and underground military bases, their own holographic technology and drones and all the rest of it. When New Jerusalem suddenly appears, they're going to release everything upon the earth, their own flying saucers, their own people manning them, everything. And they're going to attack people. They're going to destroy cities. They're going to annihilate everyone. They're going to release.
So they're using Revelation as their playbook, right?
Yeah. They're going to release the Nephilim hordes. The monsters are going to eat people, and it's going to look like, a giant mothership appears, and now we're under attack by aliens. So the mothership did this to us, and it sent all its little ships out to get us.
And they want to surround the camp of saints.
Well, more likely, a charismatic figure will turn up from space and save us. This will be Lucifer, turning up, Satan revealing himself. And he'd be like, I'm here to save you guys from the evil galactic Zerg Federation who's come to destroy us all. You know, it's kind of, I'm here to incorporate you into the Galactic Federation of Universal Planets. And to do that, you need to be like us and ascend to the next level by taking this particular technology or advancing your genetics with this particular mark or something. And once you take the stuff we're offering you, you will reach a point of evolution where you can become a member of our Galactic Alliance, and we can help you fight back against this invading force, you know, because we'll end up pushing back the first wave of alien invasion, because that was the point. That's the theater they're putting on for us. We're supposed to beat them the first time, and while we think they're recuperating, ready for a second attack, we've been galvanized by these good aliens that turned up and it gave us these wonderful weapons and technologies. And now it's like, let's all come together as one humanity to fight a common threat, as Ronald Reagan famously said in the 80s. You know what I mean? It's kind of how quickly our differences would all fall to the wayside when we're all faced with an outside alien threat, not of this world, you know? And it's kind of, well, that's the agenda, isn't it? Once Jesus turns up and we've been sufficiently convinced we're under threat of extinction from an outside alien force, then all of humanity will come together as one. So Satan has now gathered an army, the number of the sands of the sea, of 1 billion people, you know, billions of people, and they'll be convinced to go and make war with the camp of saints, surround the city they're in. That's the only way it can play out, as far as I'm concerned, from a biblical standpoint. And this is all biblical scripture. That's how the end times really plays out. And when you take that into consideration and the programming for that eventuality, they put a lot of money into that programming. They're not going to waste it. They're going to do this. Okay, they're going to fake the alien invasion when New Jerusalem becomes apparent. It's the only thing that makes biblical sense, and it's not tribulation. That's not described in tribulation as that happening.
Makes sense. The more you flesh it out, Paul, the more it makes sense. I've got a separate Telegram group to my main Telegram group, which is called God Talk, and we you know, we're all new Christians, and we're all talking and we're discussing this. And there's a lot of them who do not agree with the little season, because you know they really think, no, why would the church lie to us? Why would we? You know, it doesn't sound biblical, but once you get deeper into it and flesh out and think about how the enemy would be thinking along this, I mean, we know that these Freemasons and the Illuminati, so the inception of the Illuminati was around 1717, okay, and so they would have had, you know, 200, 300 years of long-term planning, knowing. So when their Dark Lord returned, Satan returned, and they're like, this underground uprising of people who honored him and waited for him to return, and now they are the ones essentially ruling the world. Of course, they're going to have this game plan, and they're using the Bible as their playbook. And of course, they're going to, you know, propagate this idea that we are now reaching, and we're this huge crescendo into the end times. And every other Christian channel on YouTube is talking about the end times and how to prepare. So when you flesh it out the way you have, it all makes sense. It makes perfect sense.
It's not even the real end times they believe they're in.
No, it's not.
The tribulation isn't the end.
No,
like I said,
it's not.
After tribulation comes 1,000 years of peace under Christ's rule. And then there's an indeterminate amount of time after that where Satan's in control, gathering his army. So there's at least 1,300 years after tribulation, which modern Christians don't know about. Most modern Christians in churches, they genuinely believe once tribulation's over, that's it, forever. Done. Forever and ever, Christ rules on earth in a new heaven and earth, and they
the lion will Judgment Day with they conflate Judgment Day with the tribulation as well.
They don't know about the little season or what the millennial reign of Christ really meant. They think it's eternity. And it says, just read on a little bit in Revelation 27, it says, and when the 1,000 years has ended, Satan's let loose for a little season. It ends. It's not eternal. The earthly rule of Christ with his saints is not eternal. The heavenly rule of Christ is eternal. He's always the king, always will be. You know, that doesn't stop. He doesn't stop being the Son of God and God incarnate, ruling from heaven upon high, just because Satan's ruling around on earth for a little time. He's still in control. He's still God. He's still there. You know, it's Satan's let loose for a little season, just a little season, to have his final little moment. And the Christians don't know about that. They think the Gog Magog battle at the end of time that I'm talking about is the same thing as Armageddon at the end of tribulation, and they're not the same thing.
No.
And they don't know that because no one's telling them on the pulpit. No, preachers don't talk about it, and they don't know. And because of secular history, and there is no evidence that Armageddon has happened, as far as we're aware.
Yeah.
They believe the official timeline. Then Christ is still yet to come, as far as, and it's kind of like either you trust the word of God or you trust the word of man, and the word of man is lying to you. But Jesus made it very clear, scripturally based, clear, and I've shown it many times on my channel. He was coming quickly in his time.
Yes,
he was talking to the people
so
in
much
his
scripture
time,
backing it up, and that's what I believe. What Jesus says, I don't believe what humans say or what man says.
And as I've proven yesterday, man's record is extremely fallible.
Exactly. There's so many holes in it, but there's evidence there as well to show that. Can I show you something really quickly that you might geek out over? So my family, we're Lebanese and Lebanese Christian, and in Lebanon is one of the oldest cities in the world called Byblos, which is where some of I don't know if it was Paul that was there for a while writing some of the letters, but some of the books of the Bible were written in Byblos. And my auntie lives there, and she gifted me this. I just want to show you, and this kind of can prove. It might prove some of this little season theory. So this was found. So when you dig into the ground in Byblos, anywhere, you build a house, you do anything, dig anywhere in that city, there are Byzantium, there's layers of ruins, and they're just there. They're right there on the surface. They're not far down. They're there. And look at that. It's actually a Christian oil lamp. Can you see the cross at the bottom?
I see it, yeah.
This is a Christian oil lamp. It still smells like oil. Still smells like oil. So they would have put a wick in there and oil, and this would be a very, very typical lamp that they would have used during that time. These have been dated at 1,400 years ago. The fact that it still smells like oil, I don't think it's that old. I don't think it's as old as they're saying. Now, along with this, in these layers are found fossils. It's also, I don't know if you can see that, but I've got a fossil of a fish here.
Yeah, I see it, yeah. His spine there, yeah.
Yeah. So fossils, I've got earrings, Roman earrings, Byzantine earrings, Roman earrings. These are all among the same things. First of all, that fossils might not be as old as we think they are. These beautiful, intact lantern that a Christian, an ancient Christian would have used in their daily life. And these are, if you look them up and you do an image search, you'll find them. And they're dated at around 1,400 AD. It's all there. It doesn't make sense that it's so close to the surface that they could just wipe off some mud and find Byzantine mosaics everywhere. And it just feels like it's earlier than we're told.
Oh yeah.
Everything, and I love the saying that you say is we don't even know where we are or when we are. It's that whole concept of all of time is not it's all been muddled, and this is why the little season sort of makes sense. Is there any how have Christians, so how have people of the clergy approached you? Has anyone spoken to you about this, or have they sort of rejected it outright? Have any of them said, "Oh, give me more information"?
It's a bit of everything, really. I've had, I'd say 80% of people are quite receptive to this in the Christian community. There's a pretty reserved but polite 10% out of the remaining 20 who are like, I don't agree with you, but it's interesting, and that's fair enough. And then there's 5% of the remaining 10 who hate me. I mean, absolutely, just like, you're a blasphemer, evil person spreading the doctrine of Satan, and you're going to be sorry in the end when you have to give an account to God for everything you've done to deceive thousands of Christians, And then there's like a remaining 5% who are the complete opposites, who are like, I'm a pastor, I'm a preacher, and what you have done has just blown everything wide open. And thank you. So it's a bit of everything. But most people are just like, this is cool. 80% are like, this is really cool, interesting. Thanks for sharing it. But there's this 5% I get emails from like people I used to be really good. I've been on podcasts with them talking about the Nephilim clown stuff, and then they're sending me an email with in a really passive aggressive ways. It's like, Paul, I see you talking about this little season thing, and it's kind of, you need to be careful. It's like you need to be careful.
Dangerous.
It's like the way you're talking about it is really convincing, and what if you're wrong? It's kind of like, so my crime is what I'm talking about is convincing. Is that what you're telling me? I don't know what to tell you.
What if you are wrong? It doesn't matter. I said this to my friends that don't believe it, and I've said, what if we are wrong? It doesn't matter. In the end, you still focus on Christ and you still have faith, and
I think this has brought more people.
For judgment. Yeah, I think so too. And I'll tell you what, it's renewed my enthusiasm for my faith, because the normal, to think that the tribulation is coming and all, it's horrifying, to think that. And I was never one to believe in the rapture, by the way, so it just felt like a psyop of some kind invented in the 1800s. I just never like that idea.
It's exactly that. It is exactly that. Yeah. John Darby, I think it was as well. It's all nonsense. What they're basically doing today is, like you said, taking Revelation 16 as a playbook, and they are manufacturing the illusion of tribulation. So they're making Mark of the Beast analogs all the time, whether it's RFID chips, barcodes, chip and pin, Neuralink. Yes. There's always a new example of what the Mark of the Beast could be, and there always will be a new example, because they want to keep us perpetually trapped in this mindset. Christ is about to return. It's all happening in the future, and they basically lied to us and kept us locked into a false reality of time. So they can't hide Christ, but they can at least convince us we're still waiting for him to return. That's kind of how they've done it. You know what I mean? So they've shifted where we are in time in our perceptions to keep us trapped in a false reality, basically. Now, if it's all already happened, that's going to take a lot of cognitive dissonance to break down, to understand where we actually are in the timeline. So I'm forgiving. I understand this is not easy to understand. This is not easy to grasp. If this is your first time hearing this as a Christian, like you're not going to believe me. You're going to outright deny all of this, get angry, and go through all the 5 stages of grief. I understand, because I did it. It took me a long time to even have the confidence to mention this on my channel. And I only started talking about it publicly in October a year ago. So it's only been a year since I've been making videos about this topic. But for a good 4 years prior to that, I was going through the motions trying to figure all this out and get to grips with it, because it's not easy. It's not an easy pill to swallow. I was waiting for Christ to return and tribulation to come upon us and the Antichrist to appear and all the rest of it. And I was making all these ideas of it's transhumanism's the mark of the beast, it's the black goo, it's the nanotechnology, it's the whatever. And it's kind of whatever you want to say. Yeah, exactly. And I've been there. And I understand why it seems convincing, doesn't it? But when you realize the amount of control these people have, they can easily make it look like this is happening. They can make earthquakes in diverse places. They can trigger tsunamis and storms. They can control the weather. They can do anything they want to us and convince us it's tribulation coming to pass. And I think they can have a good crack at it. But then when aliens turn up, that's not in the Christian playbook. It's not in the tribulation playbook.
No.
Millions will lose their faith in that moment. And they'll fall back on the secular training, the secular history, the secular understandings of evolution and cosmology. And they'll only think aliens are here. Where's my God now? And millions of people will fall away in that moment. Exactly. What I'm giving them is be prepared for this eventuality. There is a biblical explanation in Revelation 20. It's right there. You're stuck in Revelation 16. Move past it. We're not there anymore. And once you see Revelations 20 play out before your eyes, you'll finally know when we are. You'll know what's coming next, and you won't be deceived. That's all. My aim is just not to be deceived, and whatever goes down goes down. Exactly. So I'm trying to play out every possibility in my head, and this is an extremely real possibility. I'm not saying this isn't a joke. Like, I'm not doing this to troll anybody. And I get people telling me, this is like I said, revive their faith in Christ. No longer is he a liar. And I'm not waiting 2,000 years. He fulfilled all of his promises, and which only makes what's coming next all the more real. And this gives atheists the answers they're begging us for. Like, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. This revelation of information clearly from on high for this time, is meant to be here now. And I'm not the only one talking about this. I learned this from people far greater than me. I just articulate it well, I suppose, which is why people like the way I say it. But this isn't all my information. Like there's a huge movement happening right now that I just happen to be on the forefront of and riding that wave. But this is the time for this knowledge. This is now. This is where you're supposed to learn this now. I think God's finally saying enough's enough. I'm lifting the veil. The truth's coming out now. I'm not going to leave my people behind. Those with the eyes to see and the ears to hear and see. Gog Magog war is coming, and the new heaven and earth is around the corner. Those trapped in that fear mode of tribulation coming upon us, it doesn't bear good fruit. It never has bear good fruit. People have lied to you in a big way. And as conspiracy theorists, we know this. We know we've been lied to. Why is this too far of a stretch? And you realize many of the Christians who denounce this idea is kind of like, oh, I see. You were never really about conspiracy or the truth necessarily. You were about perpetuating and saying what you thought people wanted to hear. And now you've invested so much into it, you're too scared to lose face. It's become a pride issue for you. It's kind of like, be prepared to be wrong all the time as a conspiracy theorist. That's why I learned a long time ago. You think you've got it all figured out, you're going to get proven wrong in about a year or so. That's pretty much, and not like you were wrong. It was more advanced than you realized. That's all what always keeps happening.
Deeper than you think.
You end up going deeper. Exactly.
And that's why your channel's called Understanding Conspiracy. Paul, one last thing that I think, and I'm hearing this from my audience, because there's a lot of them teetering and they're not sure what to believe anymore. A lot of them only woke up in 2020. So they're sort of listening to this very muddled, theories that sort of include Gnosticism, include simulation theory, include some bits of Christianity. And then there's this New Ageism where Jesus is just an ascended master. And most of them are saying that they don't believe in Christianity or the Bible because it's all corrupted. I just want to ask, what's your take on the King James version of the Bible? Because they seem to think that that's the only translation. King James was a corrupt, king, and therefore him, commissioning an English translation of the Bible must be corrupt, that there's books removed. What's your theory on this? Because I know people like Gary Wayne he seems to always sort of question the King James version and yet use it as well.
It's a good translation for the time, but people are infallible, and the word of God is not ink on paper. It's written on your hearts. Okay, it's a spiritual thing. Men write books, and men are fallible. Now, the word of God is Jesus Christ. It's not a book. Okay, yes, so don't get caught up on that nonsense. If you want to know God, ask. If you want to know Jesus, ask, and you'll receive. And be sincere about it. Want it. Mean it. Actually mean it. You're in the new age. You want to talk about manifest and all these type of things and consciousness and what it means to actually have the belief behind your actions and the affirmations and the rest of it. But it's the same thing. Just ask Jesus to tell you the truth, and he'll tell you the truth. And you won't need a book necessarily to get there, but he'll send you through all the books. You'll start with the King James, and then you'll go through to the original Latin, and then the Greek, and then the Hebrew, and you'll see the differences, and you'll start to see where the corruption really is in all the words. And there are corruptions everywhere, even in the timelines of the Hebrew versus the Septuagint and the Greek. The ages have been stretched out for the original people of the Bible, the forefathers that started it all in, and it's kind of, you realize they started manipulating the timeline then. And you realize the Hebrew language is even that old, as much as we've been told it is, and these translations aren't that old. And it's, yes, there's corruptions, but ask Jesus for the answers and you'll see them all. But that doesn't mean the core message of Jesus Christ is suddenly invalidated or false, that he's not the Son of God and he didn't rise from the dead, and his sacrifice keeps you covered in that final great white throne judgment if you just accept that free gift of salvation. The gospel remains the same no matter which corruption you find in any translation whatsoever, because the word of God will not pass away and his promise will be kept no matter what destruction comes upon our time. And we were looking into the destruction that did come upon our time, and the only thing that seemed to survive that destruction was the gospel. And that's what was established immediately after the destruction, a Christ-centric kingdom. And it's not through some corruption or because Christians are evil and it was to keep man suppressed or dark or all these nonsense things. You have to understand the devil has been working very hard since the Garden of Eden to convince you that God is an evil, cruel prison keeper keeping you trapped here. And you need to break out of this prison through knowledge and ascension and self-ascension, and you can save yourself. That's all it's ever been about. It's based 100%. On it's feeding off your pride and mainly your ignorance as well. You don't know anything, but he's going to make you believe you know it all, and that's what destroys you. And Christ says, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." You can know things, and you don't have to get it all from a book. It's everywhere. His testimony is written in the stars, in the earth, in the people around you, in all. He has touched everything. They don't call it Anno Domini for nothing. You know, the year after the year of our Lord, like he is King of Kings. He is Lord of Lords. He is real, and he is available anytime you want to call. It's not, and so don't get hung up on this translation issue. It's beyond all of this. It's petty quarrels of man, I would say. But yeah, you know, read all the translations, get those things out there.
And they're available to us.
Yeah, and they show you each verse, each line, comparable translations and how they each interpreted the verse, and you can see the issues here and there, and you can see the justifications for why they chose that translation. You can see why they chose to remove certain lines here and keep them here, and you can find all the context in the footnotes, and you have to study it. It takes time to get to grips with a lot of it. There's a lot of shallow people out there who want to just throw all of it away and say, nah, Jesus is just another representation of ancient pagan sun gods. Christ is a consciousness that represents within all of us that we can all attain. Or no, Christ is the oil that goes down up your spinal column to your third eye. It's kind of like all of that is literally nonsense with a G at the start, with a silent G. It's Gnostic nonsense. Okay, yeah, it was created for you to feel like you're really, really smart, but it's all lies. It's all just lies from start to finish, and it's not as deep as you think it is, and it's not going to save you. Trust me, it's useless knowledge at the end of the day. That's my view on it. I have my own screaming at the air towards Gnostic videos out there, you know? And it's kind of
me too. And I have the there, cringy, you know? yeah, I was there too, and I have that cringy. You know, it's kind of like a, it's a baptism by fire for all of us, you know, because a lot of us had to go through that too, and this is why God gives us free will, because you know we need to go through this to come to Him free, you know, of our own free will. And to dissect what we did know and how that doesn't make sense when you see the bigger picture. And I just want to thank you for the work that you have put in for so many years into piecing this together and articulating it so well for everybody. To now also have a book out, The Nephilim Look Like Clowns, Part 1. So yes. You do have it is available through Amazon, and it's available through your own website, is it?
And the whole series and all the information is available for free on YouTube in video format with visuals to back up everything I'm saying. Okay. What I'm doing with the book, I'm just documenting it on paper for posterity more than anything. And volume 1, the history, as you see here, is basically laying out the origins of the Nephilim, the biblical history, in an easy to understand way for those who may not know anything about anything we've mentioned today, with all I'm giving there's 300 references in this book. I'm pointing to exactly where you can find this information for yourself all throughout it. It is a scholarly work. I'm not just making any of it up. You know, I know how to write a thesis, you know, and I've done it properly. And I've got so many resources and verses to back this up biblically and extra biblically and outside sources and researchers as well. It's all in the book. Brilliant. And it explains the Nephilim and then the history of the clown, as we briefly touched on today, where the costume comes from, how it was inspired by original demons. And then I touch on at the end clown societies, shamanism, shadow people, the Hat Man, psychedelic DMT jesters.
Beautiful.
It's all at the end there, and I give my psychedelic testimony at the end as well, and all these type of things. And it's giving you a taster of what Volume 2 is going to be, which is exploring all of these cultures who do dress like clowns to venerate their ancestors, and why they all believe what they're doing, and the purposes for doing it, and the aesthetical similarities we can draw between all the cultures to visually show you that the costume of a clown is just our version of what they're already doing and have been doing for a long time. And it's just been introduced in the West in an occult manner, but it's ancient. It's an ancient spiritual practice. And then the second half of the last book is going to be about films, media, music, serial killers, the fear of clowns, the multicolored collective, as I call them.
Yeah.
That's the safe way of calling them without getting demonetized.
Yeah.
All the pop culture stuff is at the end of the second book after we talk about the ancient traditions. So the first book's the history. The second book is going to be called The Now. So I'm working on that. That should be published in maybe
Wonderful.
the back end of next year. It took me a year to write the first one, but everything is kind of already loosely documented in my 44 episode series. So you don't have to read the book to understand what I'm talking about. A lot of it's just repeated information, but the book goes deeper. You know what I mean? Because I'm bringing you the foundational resources of where all the information comes from. Yeah.
Fantastic, Paul. Thank you so much for talking to me. And, really, it was just wonderful. And, I could listen to you for hours, and I do. And if you guys, I'm going to put all the links in the description below. And you can see my descriptions, my links as well. My channel's now called JCK Body, Mind, Soul, not Quantum Truths anymore, despite what you see on the screen. And so good to talk to you. Will you come back and talk to me again another time?
Sure, anytime.
I'd love to talk to you.
Get you on my channel, on my podcast.
Yeah,
you can tell your story. Yeah,
I'd love to tell you my crazy New Age to Jesus story. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
At first, I just thought people couldn't financially justify hiring a clown anymore, Then I started blaming the media for portraying my people as bloodthirsty murderers, cult members, or man-eating space aliens. Of course, the 2016 clown sightings didn't help. Ronald was the first to go. They just took him away. And we stayed silent. Because that's when the book appeared. What new form of clown bigotry was this, I thought? Hadn't my people suffered enough? My clown act was failing because people just weren't taking it seriously. And once they fired me from the circus, I tried suing them for funfair dismissal. My unicycle rusted, and my balls gathered dust. I used to make kids scream with laughter, So much that I could see the tears of joy running down their faces. And then it just stopped. I was so upset that I started eating the banana cream pies instead of throwing them in people's faces. I gained so much weight that summer. I avoided it for a while, but the book's front cover was just so eye-catching, and it was so readily available on Amazon, that I gave in and finally read the thing. I didn't even know what the Nephilim were. Luckily, the author spent the first half of the book concisely explaining the biblical history to me in an easy-to-understand manner, so that wasn't really a problem for long. That's when I read the rest of the book and realized that being a clown is no joke.
I want you to get together.